Xbox becoming a third-party publisher. I have never heard of a more divisive topic for the console war and console fandoms. But today what I want to do is I want to talk about this charged topic, to say the least, and try to disseminate some of the information that we've been given, but more or less try to look at this from a level-headed approach. I'm going to talk about some of the different conversations around it, and we'll see if there's any truth to what many people believe is the end of Xbox. Now, to give this whole thing a little bit of background, I'm going to read an article from Forbes written by Paul Tossi, who says things are escalating quickly in the Xbox rumor mill, which are now less rumors and more like official policy that Microsoft has not yet figured out how to announce as the situation quickly spins away from them. Well, this all started with a report and data mined confirmation that Hi-Fi Rush was coming to PlayStation and Switch. It has now grown to the point where an apparent massive shift in Xbox's entire gaming philosophy is on the way. Reports are that it may release its biggest game of the generation so far, Starfield, on PS5 sometime in the coming year via Xbox Era. And past that, they may be doing the same with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the just previewed actioner from Machine Games. This is something that I've seen coming for a long time. The minute that Xbox got into subscription services and really started focusing a lot of their efforts and a lot of their resources into XPlay, their streaming service where you can stream games straight to other devices like tablets and phones, I already knew that they were going to try to shift away from the console market entirely. It's the future that many of these companies are kind of looking forward to, at least some of them. Xbox for sure. Because they've even shown off in the past, they used a commercial with one of the Game Awards where Ninja was playing Fortnite on a television. And that's something that they're looking forward to, because keep in mind, Microsoft is a software company, not a hardware company. And I think a lot of people really forget about the issues that Xbox went through back in the day when they were first making the Xbox 360. They discovered just how expensive it was to be able to make a lot of different units at a good cost with high quality. That's one of the reasons why we had all of the red rings of death and things like that. There's all these different levels of quality assurance and different protocols that they have to go through for manufacturing, and manufacturing is tough, especially for a company that was just learning to do it. And not only is it tough, it's incredibly expensive. And I think far too many times people forget that for the most part, these console makers aren't making a ton of money on the hardware. All that money is coming from the software. It's the game sales after the fact that you've purchased one of the consoles. But they want to attract you to get those consoles, and that's the reason why they have exclusives. So I understand why many people are looking at what Xbox is doing and saying, why are you doing this? Nobody's going to want to buy an Xbox. And they know that. Tossi continues with, I'll focus on Starfield as a representative for everything else, probably because it's the single biggest Xbox exclusive of the generation. Likely higher profile than even future titles like Perfect Dark and Fable, and the biggest until Elder Scrolls 6, I imagine. But Xbox giving it over to PlayStation would be like The Last of Us, God of War, or Spider-Man being passed across the aisle, which would clearly never happen. So why is Xbox doing this? This seems to have leaked out because there's some sort of internal strife within Xbox about this plan, and there are cases for and against. The main idea is that Xbox has lost the console war for 2 generations now, and they're going to just stop pretending otherwise. They have repeatedly said their future is in services and bringing Xbox games to as many people as possible. On the player's side, Xbox owners still get day one Game Pass launches, and PlayStation players now get the same games eventually. Win-win. Now, Paul touches on this, but I'm seeing nobody else talk about it, and this is probably the biggest deal and the biggest reason as to why Xbox is doing this in the first place. They have lost the console generation twice. Not only with the Xbox One, but now with the Series X and Series S. And people also need to realize that that kind of loss back-to-back is unheard of. To be honest, I'm actually kind of surprised that they still stuck in with it after the fallout of the Xbox One, because that's normally where Sega would have took their step down, just like they did with the Dreamcast. And this is all something that's coming from the fact that Xbox has only really released subpar titles for a long time. Many of their favorite franchises, the things that made them stand out, don't attract audiences anymore. And while that's a part to do with their quality of those games, it's also because those games just don't appeal to audiences today. There's different types of experiences and different types of games that people want to play, and a lot of those games failed to adapt to those more modern audiences and at least those modern tastes, especially because Xbox was known for being a shooter console. However, when Gears of War and Halo don't evolve with the times, well, it makes it really difficult for them to be a springboard for that console to continue to succeed. And this comes into a lot of different issues when it comes to them, because it's not only that they were releasing subpar games. We could also talk about some of the more recent releases, because I think Starfield also didn't hit the mark. Redfall didn't hit the mark. Some of the games that they're looking at in their future library don't look like they're going to be hitting the mark either. And then you add on top of that they've been having a huge push into Game Pass, where they have been hemorrhaging money, because there's no way that you're charging so little for monthly subscription services and access to all of these games that rightfully would be sold at $70 a piece now, and you're charging people only like 10 or 15 bucks a month, depending on whatever their service plans are. Financially, it doesn't work, especially with how much money is being invested in these titles to begin with. And we know how much money is being invested in these titles because we've seen in the documents that were leaked during their Activision Blizzard acquisition trials, where we saw that Sony was spending $250 million on specific games of theirs. Well, we know that's probably pretty similar to what other studios are spending on making their games and marketing their games and etc. So if you're investing that much money into your games, how are you getting it out of the subscription service? Especially if you're making it your main way of trying to deliver games. That's the way that that's the vehicle that you're trying to onboard all of these new players onto your platform. And while it did work in some way, it wasn't making enough money. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you reach a certain subscriber count. But sorry, players are just not ready to hand over the keys and hand over ownership of all of their games. They'd rather hold on to them. Paul continues with, except that's not how it's being received more widely. The concept raises so many questions, it's hard to know where to start. For starters, it would make the premise of buying an Xbox for Microsoft's promised big lineup of exclusives relatively pointless, and players who have already bought into that ecosystem based on Microsoft's stated plans about big future games are understandably upset as a result. Why buy an Xbox for Xbox games when you can buy a PlayStation and now get PlayStation and Xbox games? And in terms of Microsoft's goals for Game Pass, how does this further that? Presumably, something like Starfield is just going to be offered on sale for $70 on PlayStation. So this does nothing to increase Game Pass subscriptions, only to give less reasons to buy an Xbox in the first place. It also signals that perhaps Game Pass is not quite as healthy as Microsoft lets on. And to justify the enormous development costs of a game like Starfield or Indiana Jones, it turns out you do need to sell it for $70 to some amount of people outside of the Xbox/Game Pass ecosystem. This specifically makes Starfield feel like a failure that needs extra juice from a direct rival, or a lack of confidence Indiana Jones will pull its weight without a wider audience. And this more or less hits on exactly what I was talking about before, about Xbox releasing subpar releases. Starfield was meant to be the beacon of hope. It was meant to be the one thing that was going to drive people to, one, buy an Xbox, and two, have more faith in the Xbox ecosystem, Game Pass, just Xbox in general. However, it didn't. It fell short. And some of that blame lies with Xbox because they were the ones that weren't properly monitoring Bethesda and keeping Todd and co. in line and making sure that whatever experience was released by them was going to be top-notch. It was going to be something that people loved and something people want to play. And that's me not saying that nobody liked it, but on average, people didn't. There was a lot of issues, a ton of issues with that game, and many of those issues are actually coming back to poor decisions that Xbox has made. And this is something that I've been preaching for a long time, and that Xbox Series S has ruined this generation of gaming for all gamers, not just Xbox gamers, all gamers. We've been receiving less quality products because many of these studios that release third-party titles on all consoles have to make a Xbox Series S version of whatever they're making. And it's incredibly difficult for many of these studios to do. Baldur's Gate 3 was one of those games, and it took them quite a while to even be able to release it, and even to get that game to fit and work properly on the Xbox Series S, well, it required them to remove couch co-op entirely. What does that tell you? This is something that at one point in time I was getting ready to write a video. Actually, I already have a script ready that's called The Downfall of Xbox. I wrote this last year, and I never released it just because I was distracted with other topics I wanted to cover. But one of the things that I realized that Xbox started to do after a while was when they first conceived the Xbox, it was called the Direct Xbox. And the whole premise of them making the console in the first place was because they wanted to make a platform that was easier for game developers to develop games for. They figured if they could streamline it in some way and make their jobs easier, then everybody would get better games as a result, and everybody would want to make games for Xbox. And they were right, because they continued with that philosophy going into the Xbox 360. But that's where that philosophy ended, because in the Xbox One is when they wanted to make it a home entertainment console, and we remember all the memes then. And now, today, their main focus is Xbox Game Pass and becoming a streaming service and a subscription service. They've left behind the idea of making games easier for developers to develop games for them, and instead have only made things more difficult for developers in the long run, which makes us all suffer in the end, because that's a lot of extra hoops for many of these developers to have to jump through to be able to release their games. So many of the issues that Xbox faces, and they're facing with Game Pass and everything else, are all self-inflicted wounds that have been building up since the Xbox 360. They were on the right track. They just hopped off it, and they never got back on. Paul continues with, this feels like an all-or-nothing situation. There's some idea that this may be applying to big Bethesda-based games like Starfield and Indiana Jones, but not core games like Halo. Oh, but wait. Maybe the Master Chief Collection, and maybe this other game or that game. The point is, players are going to have no faith in knowing what will actually be Xbox Game Pass exclusive going forward if Microsoft is just picking and choosing randomly, or saying one thing and changing their mind later, which is what's happening right now. With this, Xbox essentially becomes a third-party publishing brand that for some reason still makes hardware. But also, they want you to subscribe to Game Pass, but you don't need an Xbox for that. And you also don't need it for exclusive games anymore either. Maybe just early access. Or not. Who knows? Microsoft is supposed to be explaining all of this soon, but I don't think there's a way to spin it that makes it sound like a good idea. To me, this feels like the endpoint of failing to cultivate meaningful exclusives compared to rivals, and way overplaying their hand when it comes to Game Pass. And if this happens, it may not be the end of Xbox, but it will be the end of some form it's taken for 4 generations now. Now, there's this falls off the rails for me in a couple different places, but I will say this. The people that already invested into Xbox are rightful to feel wronged if this is the direction that Xbox is going to go in, because they specifically invested in Xbox because they wanted to play those specific games. Now, they're still going to be able to play those games, but they invested in it because they thought it was the only place they were going to be able to play those games. Now, knowing that they could have just bought a PlayStation and still had access to those games later, they probably would have made that choice to begin with, but they can't. And not everybody can afford to have multiple consoles or PCs or anything like that. Now, with that said, the reason why I say this conversation goes off the rails for me is that when it comes to exclusivity, I am an anti-exclusivity Andy. I hate it. I'm sick and tired of not being able to play all of my games in one place, because not only is it more convenient, it's cheaper, and it's my preference. It's the highest quality gaming experience I could possibly have when I get to play games on my PC. And I've loved the fact that Xbox has been releasing all of their games on day one, because it made it where I didn't need to own an Xbox anymore. I could just own a PlayStation or a Nintendo Switch and then a PC, and I get to play all the games that I want to play. I don't need to own 4 consoles, which with my PC included, to be able to play everything I want to play. And I believe that's where most people want to be. Everybody wants that. Who wouldn't want to be able to play all of their games in one place? Everybody has their own specific preferences with their controllers and their setups and everything like that. And again, it's cheaper. So for me, when they say things like, oh man, it's sad to see exclusivity go, what's the point? What's the point? The point is that if we can get away from having all of these systems have exclusive titles, which I know is unrealistic, but in the utopia world that we don't have exclusive titles, that means that these companies, if they're going to stay in hardware, have to compete by hardware rather than try to lock us in with specific experiences that we want to have. Instead of forcing us to play the games that we want to play because we have to buy their console to play them, instead they have to fight each other on who can make the higher quality system for the best price. Now, the sentiment on social media is relatively charged. And looking at TCMF Games writing, I personally hope Xbox doesn't go third party. I don't want a world where PlayStation isn't competing with Xbox. It doesn't benefit us. I know some of you don't like hearing that, but it's how I've seen it and what I've said in the past. Nintendo do their own thing. They don't care about what PlayStation and Xbox do. I'm really curious to see what Xbox leadership say about the meltdown happening right now. And now, while this is relatively level-headed, the problem is that this isn't the kind of competition that we want, and it doesn't necessarily mean that these companies and the competition that they have has really benefited us all to begin with in the first place, especially if we're looking at the quality of games that Xbox has released since the Xbox One era. Many of the games have just failed to hit the mark, like I said earlier, and many of their games are still continuing to do so. Now, largely, personally, I believe that this is just a American style of development issue that we're kind of seeing, where a lot of the more Eastern games are starting to appeal to more audience than, well, Western games are. But with that said, I don't see where this competition has really led to either of these game companies really making better products as a result of their two experiences. The best games that we've had over the last few years have all been third party. While there have been some really good ones that have been released by both Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo in the past, they don't account for most of them. Not even close. Jez Corden of Windows Central and the Xbox 2 podcast writes, 1. Alienate fans by making them worry about the future health of the platform and their purchased games. 2. Create a meme that Xbox has no exclusive games, pushing wider audiences away. 3. Be confused why everyone thinks this is a bad idea. 4. Pivot when it's too late. Jez Corden also posted a poll asking, do you feel confident investing in the Xbox ecosystem right now? With 56.1% saying no and 17.9% saying unsure. Now, what I find relatively odd here is that you're going to have some people that are going to have opinions on this on social media that are inclined to do so, either financially or because of their fan allegiance to whatever console that they align themselves with. And this isn't necessarily a mark against Jez, but he does work for Windows Central and he does have an Xbox podcast. So people like that are going to be relatively biased when it comes to a decision like this that Microsoft is making. And I think that making the assumption that this is a bad idea really doesn't make a lot of sense in the context of Xbox is just going to sell more games, period. They're just going to appeal to a wider audience. More people are going to have more access to the games that they release, and there really is no downside to that outside of Game Pass or Xbox console sales. However, they haven't been able to figure out anything to make Xboxes sell better. Even when lowering the prices, it didn't matter, and nobody really paid attention to it whatsoever. And the games that they've been using to try to attract people to their console haven't worked either, because many of those games have failed to hit the mark. So you have to do something to make money. Otherwise, the whole thing just goes upside down. So, again, we're going to get into some of these, but for the most part, you're seeing people start to lean on the side of it's just the fandom side, and that's about it. Another user writes, if Xbox does decide to go the route all the rumors suggest, the thing I don't understand is why now? You've invested $100 billion into your gaming division to turn things around, only to pivot before the majority of them even have a chance to change anything. Why not wait a couple years and see if your investments change your fortunes or not first? And that's because they have given many of these different companies an opportunity to show them a return on investment. They have spent a ton of money pulling together all of these studios, but many of the studios that they've purchased have not released products that were good enough to be able to draw attention to Xbox in the first place. If we're looking at Bethesda specifically, Starfield didn't hit the mark. It didn't move sales. It didn't move the numbers. And also on top of that, neither did Redfall in any way, shape, or form. They did have Hi-Fi Rush, but Hi-Fi Rush isn't a console seller, and it isn't something that's going to drive a bunch of people to come play your game on Game Pass. So with that said, if you have all of these companies that you've invested all of this money into, and I would also imagine that after they got Activision Blizzard, they probably realized that Activision Blizzard wasn't making enough money for them to show a big enough return on investment for them to continue to wait any longer before doing something more drastic to start generating more revenue. Thus, why we saw a lot of the layoffs go off, because they walked in and said, no, this company's wasting too much money. There's a lot of areas where we need to save money, and they're starting to scale back. Another user writes, over 300 votes already. More than 60% of Xbox gamers would leave Xbox if games go everywhere. Go back and rerun the numbers, factoring in an Xbox console ecosystem half the size or less than it is today. I'm leaving Xbox. There is no point in owning an Xbox if the games go to a console that already has more games. This strategy will be the end of the Xbox console and Xbox Game Pass. I'm sorry. Running a poll with 300 votes and going, there it is, guys. There it is. Everybody's out. I don't know what to say. Wrap it up. Phil Spencer, you're out the door. Go rerun the numbers. We got 300 votes over here. Oh, man. I don't know what to say. A lot of these different profiles that I see pop up are people that are saying, I'm leaving Xbox. I'm done with Xbox. And I go and I look, and their entire Twitter profile, their entire online persona is Xbox, Xbox Game Pass, Xbox games, everything Xbox. And there is a level of bias and a level of dramatics that are going to come with something like that, because when you have actually made something the avatar of your life, your personality, your purpose, then yeah, chances are you're going to feel relatively hurt when something like this happens, but it's not as dramatic as many of these people make it seem. The director of publishing from Larian Studios writes, people's minds have been absolutely blown by Microsoft's controversial strategy to get more people playing Xbox games by releasing them to a broader range of people. Let me give you some optimism. The fact that there are so many vocal and active Xbox players means that there's an audience. If there's an audience, there's an opportunity. Your favorite ecosystem isn't going anywhere, but strategies shift with the times to make sure the economics make sense. In spite of Xbox games being on Game Pass PC and Xbox, they habitually make Steam top sellers at full price. Why wouldn't they want to make money off games, thereby reducing the risk, while at the same time being able to say, well, over here, it's basically free? And for me, this hits the nail right on the head. Typical Larian W. But a lot of the people that are looking at this are not looking at it from a business perspective. If Xbox makes their games more available, yes, that does eventually mean that they're going to make less money off of the Xbox specific ecosystem, off of the actual hardware itself. However, that doesn't mean that the company makes less money overall, because if people like their games, people are going to be playing their games. And to be honest with you, if they're releasing their games on more platforms, they're going to be a little bit more inclined to make sure that those games are even better than they are, so they can continue to make as much money as they possibly can off of selling those games on various platforms. And he's absolutely right, because there are games that have done very well on Steam, even though those games were on Xbox Game Pass or on or released on the Xbox. And I'm a really good example of that, even though I realize that, you know, this is kind of an anecdotal, but for the most part, even when games have released on Xbox Game Pass, I just went ahead and bought them on Steam because that's where I'd rather have all my games to play. Even though I realize I would get it cheaper, that doesn't really matter to me, because I want to have access to it all the time, and I want all my games in one place. I don't like having multiple launchers. I don't see it necessarily as a problem as many people do when it comes to things like the Epic Game Store or the Steam or GOG or anywhere else, but for me, I just like having them all in one place because it's easier, it's less software I need to have on my computer, and yeah, I just like it. Finally, another user writes, I honestly feel like Xbox couldn't be deciding to go multi-platform at a more stupid time. This is the first time for me, and in many years, everyone is actively paying attention to Xbox's upcoming slate of exclusives because it's so solid. Giving up now is so dumb. I understand bringing live service games like Sea of Thieves to PlayStation 5 as that's objectively going to bolster the game's life, and it's old enough that frankly everyone who would have bought it by now on Xbox probably already has, but Starfield and Indiana Jones spells we are giving up on our consoles too much. Yes, they are giving up on their consoles because it's the best decision for them to make as a business going forward. It makes sense if it's a loss leader, but there's no leader for the loss. That's what the biggest problem is. And also on top of that, stating that this is the time that everybody's paying attention to their exclusives, for the most part, people have only been paying attention to their exclusives for the wrong reasons, because their exclusives have not done well. Starfield, in my opinion, is not a good game. It just isn't a good game. And they still fail to be able to update it and fix it in a solid amount of time, whereas other studios have absolutely no problem in doing so. Do I believe that for some odd reason they're going to be able to crank out some amazing, incredible, exclusive first-party title from Activision Blizzard? No, not even close. If anything, the only reason why they wanted Activision Blizzard was so they could get a hold of King, because they could make all that mobile money. Now, with that said, if we're looking at the rest of their studios and the rest of their library, what are people so high on looking into the future? Indiana Jones is not a console seller. There's people that are looking forward to it. I loved Indiana Jones when I was growing up, but that doesn't necessarily mean I would see an Indiana Jones video game and go, oh man, I need to go buy that console. And I can't see many other people feeling that way either. What else do we have? Avowed? Most of the people on Xbox are down on Avowed. I've seen all the comments relating to it. Many of the people, even when I was talking about bringing it up, I wanted to make a video about Avowed because I thought it looked kind of cool. But for the most part, people don't even like the way it looks. They don't like the voice acting. They don't like the art, the characters, and they have absolutely no faith that Obsidian's going to be able to make a good game with it, even though the last game that Obsidian put out was fantastic. Grounded? Fantastic game. But not enough people cared about it or played it. Look at the rest of their studios. There's really not anything there outside of how well they've done with Forza or Flight Sim. ... There's nothing there. Their exclusives are not good enough for them to stay in the console market. It's just as simple as that. And the only way for them to be able to remain profitable is probably for them to start jettisoning the idea of being a console maker. And the best idea for them going forward is just to be a third-party publisher more than anything else. And personally, when I'm looking at their library and the studios that they have, that's probably the best route they have to go, because that's going to take some pressure off of those studios that have been making games for them. Because many of those studios, they're being relied on to put out games that can sell consoles. But if they don't have to worry about making console sellers, then it makes it a little bit easier for them to make better games as a result. Now, I'm not going to continue to go through all of these different tweets because for the most part, it just gets relatively repetitive. It's just a lot of fanboyism, a lot of tribalism. You're seeing a lot of the PlayStation fans that are making fun of the Xbox players. You're also seeing the Xbox players have an absolute meltdown. They're deleting their Twitter accounts that they've had for all this time with all the Xbox paraphernalia all over the place. But to be honest, I hate to say it, this is what you get for tying yourself to a ship. There's no reason for you to look at a piece of plastic in your living room, and even though you have a lot of friends that play it and you like the games around it, you can be a part of a community, but you don't need to make it your entire purpose and personality, and I think far too many people do that. I get it. We want to be a part of a team, but how about we just be a part of a team called gamers? Just a bunch of people that really enjoy games and like to share, talk about them, and we want them all in one place, and we want the death to exclusivity. Please. I just want all my games in one place. Simple as that. Personally, this is something that I am really happy to see, and I hope this the direction that Xbox is going in. I hope they go full force into it, because I do think there's a potential for this to be able to shake up the rest of the industry and maybe even pressure them into making some of their games more available as well. Because as we've already seen with the gaming industry, even though it is the most profitable out of all entertainment industries, it's one of the fastest growing industries in all industries. But there's a lot of cost to what they've been putting out. And, looking at some of the games that even Sony has released, even Nintendo's released, while they do have exclusives to draw people to them, at the end of the day, if they're not making enough money, then they need to start selling them to more people. And the more available they make their games, the more money they get to make. It's as simple as that. Not that I'm necessarily asking for like Pokemon on PC, but I mean, we'd probably be able to get mods and probably a better game out of it, actually. It'd be like a Pokemon Power World. But yeah, so that's my opinion on all this stuff. I think it's a great thing. I realize that it definitely isn't great for the people that invested specifically in Xbox because they thought that's the only place they were going to buy things. I'm not saying because they want to make that their ecosystem, because they want to make that their home, because they want to make that like their fandom kind of thing. No, I'm saying the people that said, I want to be able to play Halo, so I bought an Xbox to play Halo. Or I wanted to be able to play X or Y game, and I thought this is the only place I was going to be able to play it. And now they're going to be able to play it anywhere. I understand them being upset about their purchase because they could have just bought a PlayStation or they could have just bought a Nintendo and they would have access to those games. But I don't know, man. This is the result of consoles. I get that they're there specifically to be affordable for more people because it allows, it lowers the bar of entry for most. But this is the downside of this kind of thing. And to believe that Sega would be the only console we'd ever see disappear and, fall off into the distance just the same way as Atari did and, many others before them that failed, it's just going to keep happening. Sometimes when one domino falls, another one stands up. So we'll see what happens. Now, initially, that's where my video was going to end. However, as I was editing for this video and getting ready to post it, well, I ended up getting contacted by one of my contacts on the dark gamer web that has some insider information that I trust because, well, they're a trustworthy contact. And the situation over at Xbox is a little bit more grim than people are letting on. And because of the issues that they've had with getting Game Pass to be profitable, as well as some of the issues that they've seen with some of the sales of some of the games that they've had, as well as their recent acquisition of Activision Blizzard, well, they're put in dire straits. And as such, they're looking into potentially putting in ads in Game Pass. So you'll be playing a game and then you'll get to a different chapter, and between chapters you'll get ads and things like that. So you'll have two different versions. You can have Game Pass without ads and Game Pass with ads. Just another way to be able to monetize it. I made a video, a couple videos actually, a couple weeks ago, talking about the Ubisoft subscription services fiasco. And in that video, I was specifically trying to tell people, hey, you need to pay attention to stuff like this because this is what ultimately many of these companies do want to go to, because if they do, they can monetize games further and they can take more and more content away from us and lessen our experience, all for a profit. And this is something that's even worse than what we've seen with microtransactions. This is the macro transaction that they're trying to move towards. This is the very few opportunities that we get to actually see a trend start to happen and for us to put our foot down and not support it, therefore making them unable to force this upon us in the future. This is one of those situations. If Xbox chooses to do something like that, we need to stop it right now. Otherwise, what we're going to be seeing in the future is they're going to start piecemealing everything to us. It's going to be standard definition, high definition. They're going to sell us frame rates. They're going to sell us ads and no ads, all kinds of different things. And it's only going to continue to get worse unless we vote with our wallets. If Xbox chooses to do this, I implore you not to support this. Anyway, this video has gone on far too long. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, think about supporting the channel. I'm going to leave my Patreon link down below. Outside of that, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. Catch me live, and